Hey guys, Potato McWhiskey here, and I'm here to talk about a few little tips and tricks that I've discovered for the game. Now, what I'm going to be going over, these aren't like the definitive settings, I just want to preface this. You're always going to want to experiment with some of these settings and find out what works for you, but I've been playing for a little time now, and I think I've figured out most of the good settings. So we're going to go up here into the settings menu, and you can reach that by pressing escape and then clicking up here on game settings. So in the name tags area, probably what you're going to want to do is turn off your own name and your own guild name and possibly even your own hit points. What this will do is it will make it so there's no visual clutter over your head. Let me turn these on so you can see what they look like when they're on. You probably know what they look like when they're on, but just for the sake of clarity, this is what I would normally see. And I don't need to see that information. That's available up here in the top left. Sometimes my personal preference is to leave the hit points bar on, but you may want to take that off. I'm also going to recommend that you use the small name tag type because the big name tag type, it's pretty big, it's pretty obnoxious, and it takes up a lot of visual space on the screen. That would be my recommendation. I would say go with the small name tag type and only leave your health bar on at most. Now for guild and alliance members, I would recommend turning off the guild name in certain respects. And I would also possibly even recommend turning off their names if you're in a really big fight, although it can be worth it to keep those names on. But I would consider turning off guild names. This is something I've been playing with. I've been mostly keeping it on. But for other players, you're going to want to have everything so that you can identify them. The only downside to this setup is that you will occasionally possibly identify enemy players as guild and alliance members, because if they don't have a guild, it'll look like they do because you have guild names turned off. So that's probably an argument against turning off guild tags. I think it's worth it because I lose some clutter on my screen and it makes things clearer for me, even for the sacrifice of a little bit of clarity in occasionally getting, attacked by someone who doesn't have a guild. I'm also going to recommend that you're going to want to keep the off-screen name tags on. If you turn this off, you're essentially crippling your vision by a few meters in every direction around your screen, because people are going to be able to see you first and they're going to be able to make the decision whether to approach you or to avoid you sooner than you will be able to if you don't have this activated. Now in mouse control settings, I think it's definitely worth it to have double press to attack. Before I had this activated, and before I started telling people to have this activated, I would see people, particularly when we were doing like PvE, people would accidentally walk into creatures and attack the wrong stuff and aggro a bunch of stuff. So having double press to attack, it helps reduce the number of errors by making your movements more deliberate and requiring you to do a little bit more to screw up. So if you're screwing up with this on, you really screwed up, whereas it's very easy to screw up if you have this deactivated. I also recommend the classic controls. Some people like the RTS controls, but I find them a little bit clunky with the right click to move, left click to interact. There is something to be said, however, about even if you're on classic controls, left clicking near your hero or your character won't move you, but if you right click near your character, it will move you much sooner. So even if you're on classic controls, you might want to consider using right click to move, particularly if you only need to move a small adjustment. Like I'm clicking here with my left mouse button, but I'm not moving, and if I click there with my right mouse button, I will move. So I find if I'm dodging AoEs, I'll use my right button to move anyway. You can also just left click and then press S to stop. That's a little bit more intense to do, but some people might find that a good way to do things. Okay, for the interface, I'm going to recommend, if you are not disruption class, as in you don't have any abilities that move people around, I'm going to recommend that you turn off show for ally damage and show for enemy heal. Because if you're not throwing people away, all you're doing is reducing the visual clutter on your screen. This is pretty important because it makes the battle more readable. It increases your chance that you're going to understand what's happening and you're going to be able to figure things out. Now, if you are a disruption class, for example, if you are using a knight, or is it guardian or knight? The one with wind wall. There's a plate chest with wind wall. If you're using that, you are going to want to be able to see ally damage and enemy heal, because you don't want to be pushing people out of your ally damage and you don't want to be letting people stand around in there or healing. So you're going to want to be able to see these things. Now, that's if you want to play at a really high level. You can probably get away with them turned off, even if you're a disruption class. I would recommend leaving them on if you are a disruption class. I'm also going to recommend that you want to turn off your warning before PvP areas, although I will say it might be better to leave this on until you're comfortable with the PvP areas. I know some people are taking their time getting out of the yellow and blue zones, but I think once you get used to going in and out of the PvP zones a couple times, it's definitely worth turning this off. And I think once you can actually turn it off from the prompt. I'm also going to recommend turning on force combat mode. There are drawbacks to having it on when you want to interact with certain things in combat or you want to quickly loot stuff. So You're going to want to turn this off if you're doing sort of hit and runs and just loading things and getting out. But I personally have it off because it helps me reduce the amount of mistakes I have. But if you're confident, you should turn it off. Sometimes I turn it off if I'm in a particular situation, or I know that I'm going to do PvE chests, for example, and I want to just kill the chest, loot the chest, and then run away from the mobs. Auto-target aggressor, again, it's sort of a personal preference thing. It's definitely an okay thing to have. There are drawbacks again to it, but it's, you're going to have to kind of weigh them up. Do you want to automatically target people who attack you? It can be worthwhile to do so, but, it's up to you. Spell indicator intensity, this is another one of those sort of, it's up to you, which way do you like it. Moving on to the HUD, I personally recommend, if you have a 1920 by 1080 screen, I recommend doing the 100% HUD scaling. I find at the 80% mark, it's a little bit too small for me to read properly. So I bring it up to 100%, and that makes things much clearer. It's much easier to see the buttons. It's much easier to click on stuff if I need to. I also recommend turning off the damage numbers and the show harvestable tooltips. I would leave speech bubbles on, but this one is kind of more of a personal preference. But I would definitely recommend turning off damage numbers. I think it is nice to be able to see how much damage you're doing, but it becomes extremely spammy if you're in any sort of group situation. So it just takes up too much visual clutter on the screen, and so on and so forth. The spell bar position is kind of personal preference. I don't think there's anything really needs to be said about that. I mean, do you want it on the side or do you want it on the bottom? I'm used to it on the bottom, and I don't see any negatives to having it there. In social settings, you're going to want to turn on auto-deny duel requests and auto-deny guild invites. If you are in a situation where you've decided you want to do these things, just turn them off and then turn them back on. You don't need to get spammed with guild invites. You don't need to get spammed with duel invites. Just flick these off and forget about them. And if you ever need to do them, you just turn them back on again. I'm also going to take a quick moment here to talk about some important key bindings. One of the most important ones is the self-cast key bindings. That is the alt plus the spell number. So for example, if I were a healer, say I wanted to cast my primary spell on myself without selecting myself, I would hold down the alt key and then press the Q key, and then I would cast that spell on myself. This is incredibly important for healers because clicking on yourself or clicking on your portrait is a bit of a pain in the ass, so it's really important that you learn to use these alt self-cast hotkeys. I'm also going to recommend that you also, occasionally you're going to want to know how to select yourself, and Control plus S is a useful one to have. Another useful one is S, which is just stop all actions. It can be useful for stutter stepping if you're needing to move in a particular pattern, or you want to move just a little bit and then stop. You can use S to do that. And finally, the most important hotkey in the game, in my opinion, is spacebar. Now you can rebind this to something. I like to leave it as spacebar because my thumb is always on the spacebar and therefore it's always accessible. But the reason this one is so important is because it's for orb walking. Now I'm going to do a separate video on orb walking, but essentially what it means is when you attack and your attack goes off, there's a small window before your next attack will happen in which you can move to a new position and then attack again. This is really important for efficiently clearing dungeons. It's really important for repositioning during PvP. It's really important for dodging AoEs while still outputting DPS in dungeons. It's an incredibly important skill, and that's why it's going to get its own separate video with a very detailed breakdown of how to do it, how to teach yourself how to do it, and how to learn it. But just know that hotkey, when you're using the double click to attack mode, that's going to be the primary way you're going to attack things. You're going to click on them, and then you're going to press your spacebar, and that's how you're going to initiate your attack. I think this is it's a much more, I don't know if a skillful way to play is the way to put it, but it's a much more, it has a higher skill cap. It makes you better at the game. I think it improves you, I think, if you do it this way. It gives you more fine-tuned control over your experience. That's pretty much it for this video. I've more or less covered everything I wanted to cover. I hope you guys found these things useful, and if you have anything you want to say, make sure you let me know. You might disagree on some of the settings and so on and so forth. These are just my personal preferences and things that I've found that are helpful. A few of those are what I would recommend to other people, but I think you should definitely fiddle around with the settings in a game to figure out how to best suit your gameplay flow. I want to thank you guys very much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye bye.